After 6 months with the iPad Pro M4 and its Nano Texture Display, has it lived up to the hype or is it just an overpriced gimmick? Let's break it down. Welcome to this tech episode of the Tailoring Talk magazine with me, Roberto. I'm going to walk you through my experience of my iPad Pro M4 with Nano Texture Display, including everything you want to know about that new display, performance and the M4 chip, battery life and charging, accessories and ecosystem, any issues and drawbacks I've found, and finally, my verdict on if this device has been worth the huge investment and exactly who the M4 iPad Pro is for. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more of our magazine-style content. Now, on with the review. I've had a real, let's call it, frustrating relationship with the iPad. I've been an iPad user since day one, and as a bespoke tailor, where design, imagery, and presentation is so important, the iPad to me was exactly how Steve Jobs described it would be all those years ago. Magical. In the first few years, the iPad was best utilized as primarily a consumption device and very light productivity. You could check emails and do a little bit of document work for sure, but it really came into its own for watching and reading content. TV shows, movies, books, magazines, and of course, web browsing. In the world of fashion and bespoke tailoring, I found it to be brilliant for presenting design ideas to clients and using iPhoto to show examples of my previous work, and I still do that to this day. When the first large screen 12.9-inch iPad was released, I was one of the first in the UK to get my hands on one, and it was a game changer in terms of how much more screen real estate it had. Combined with the Apple Pencil, it was an absolute delight to work with for both writing and design sketches. As the iPad evolved, so too did the accessory ecosystem, and during the pandemic, the best keyboard accessory for the iPad ever was released, the Apple Magic Keyboard for iPad. Finally, the iPad felt as close to a MacBook as it has ever felt, and we'll talk about iPad OS and its limitations in a bit. But with that wonderful new accessory came a lot of weight. Now, I travel around a lot. Working for busy individuals means I often need to go to where they are to make their clothes buying experience as easy as possible for them. I take my iPad with me everywhere, but the weight of the 2021 M1 iPad Pro with Magic Keyboard was getting too much, along with everything else I have to carry in terms of fabrics, etc. The iPad had become such a vital part of my travel essentials, I couldn't be without it. After all, aside from the obvious things like presenting and sketching out ideas for clients, accessing our online resources and doing the boring but essential stuff like invoicing, being iPadless was just not an option for me. So the best compromise was to drop down to an iPad mini, which in terms of weight saving was a huge relief. The difference was so big that often I would have to double check to make sure I had the thing with me. But after a few weeks of that, there were some irritations. Compared to the iPad Pro, where I've been used to the very large ProMotion display with its superior contrast and brightness, the iPad mini screen was making me a little nauseous and claustrophobic. Writing and sketching with the Apple Pencil was not the same experience either, and as for doing any light work, it was just too small and awkward. But then, in fall of 2024, Apple announced the new iPad Pro, the first time an iPad was getting the latest Apple silicon, the M4, in a form factor that is the thinnest device Apple have ever made. Thinner even than the iPod Nano, which just seems impossible. I was sold. I could go back to the screen size I preferred with a third of the weight. The Apple Magic Keyboard had been totally redesigned too, with an aluminium top case and a keyboard that should feel identical to using a MacBook Pro, which then made this a far more attractive device to get some serious work done on. I pre-ordered right away, and on collection day I went to the Apple store a little earlier so I could have a look at the new tandem OLED display. It was gorgeous. Then I compared it with the Nano Texture Display, and suddenly I had a really big choice to make. One of my minor irritations with the iPad over the years is just how difficult it is to use in bright or harsh lighting conditions or outside on sunny days. The reflections on the display combined with the excessive fingerprints can make it unusable in those situations. The Nano Texture Display looked more matte in its finish, but as I examined it and tried to think of the environments I use an iPad in, a workroom with bright tube lighting overhead, a house with big picture windows that lets lots of sunlight through, and the environment I'd like to use it in, summer days out on the deck or outside a coffee shop for instance, the more and more the Nano Texture Display appealed to me. So, after a long debate with my friends, the staff in the Apple Store, I decided to pay the extra money and I got the 1TB 13-inch iPad Pro with Nano Texture Display. I also got the new Apple Pencil Pro, Magic Keyboard, and I got an additional cover for those times I don't want or need to carry the iPad around with the keyboard case. Spoiler alert, I've barely used that except for when I take the iPad on holiday. First impressions of build quality and design, well, you can see my instant reaction in my original unboxing video, but I'll tell you, even a few months later, I still find this device simply magical to hold every time I look at it or pick it up. It's such a big, beautiful screen and so light. The combination of glass and metal feels so great, so premium, and it feels like a device that was designed with a lot of thought, love, and care. The new Magic Keyboard is brilliant. It feels pretty much like using my MacBook Pro, which I love. Typing on it is an absolute joy. In fact, the script for this video was written on a long train journey on this iPad with this keyboard. The Pencil Pro has been great, although admittedly I rarely use the extra functions that it comes with. So, onto the Nano Texture Display. Does it reduce glare significantly? In a word, yes, it absolutely does. You can see here in this B-roll shot the edges of the screen reflecting the harsh lights overhead and how, as you pass through to the nano texture surface of the screen, they suddenly fade away. The Nano Texture Display is so good, in fact, that you don't notice the benefit of it in daily use. It's not something I think about. In fact, as I wrote this very section of the review, I crossed from a train tunnel into bright sunlight and was able to just carry on typing without skipping a beat. I haven't noticed any difference in clarity, sharpness, or brightness. Sure, being a matte display, some would argue the depth of black is not as deep as on the standard display, but when you put the two side by side, any of those minor differences, and they are minor, are negated by the fact that on the Nano Texture Display you can see everything most of the time without interference from reflections or bright light. On the standard display, it's basically like a mirror, so you have to deal with reflections pretty much all of the time. And as for fingerprints and smudging, of course that happens, but weirdly, it's not as noticeable on the Nano Texture Display in the 6 months I've owned this device. I've probably cleaned it less than half a dozen times. However, the regular display on previous iPads I used to own, I had to clean every couple of days. The Nano Texture Display doesn't get any less filthy, it's just been, for me personally, far less noticeable. So, who would benefit most from opting for the Nano Texture Display? Bearing in mind it's not just the £100 more than the standard display, you also need to opt for the 1TB version of the iPad Pro. I'd say right off the bat, anyone who can afford it and for who a few £100 here and there is not an issue, you're the kind of person that always goes for the best of anything anyway, whether you make full use of it or not. So go ahead, knock yourself out. For anyone else who does need to weigh up the pros and cons and consider your investment carefully, I'd say the Nano Texture Display is worthwhile for anyone who creates a lot of content on their iPad. You're the sort of person that doesn't just use your iPad as that nice to have but non-essential device for content consumption. You use your iPad every day for writing, reading, photo work, video editing, any form of presentation and showing things to people. If you do those things and you can make the numbers work, do not hesitate. I don't think I'll ever go back to a display with no nano texture. In fact, I want nano texture on everything. When I ordered my M4 MacBook Pro late 2024, I specified that with nano texture without hesitation. In future, when I upgrade my studio display, I will go for nano texture, and I would love to see a nano texture glass screen iPhone Pro one day. Performance and the M4 chip. Let's face it, if you're still rocking the M1 iPad Pro, there's very little out there that will be pushing even that processor anywhere near its limits, which means that a jump to the M4 is even more ridiculous. There's so much headroom that you won't even notice a difference for a day-to-day use, like browsing the internet, watching content and general multitasking. I guess where I do appreciate all that raw power is when it comes to video and audio editing. My M1 iPad Pro was prone to the odd freeze here and there when editing big audio files in Ferrite, but the M4 handles absolutely everything that I throw at it. I don't actually like video editing on my iPad Pro, but I can do it. And it cuts through 4K edits like a hot knife through butter. I've been able to press the button on a 4 gig, 20-minute video and have it ready to upload in just a few minutes. I'd say that the M4 iPad Pro is overkill for most users, and if you don't need the added benefit of the display technology, the new iPad Air rocks an M3 chip and will be way more sufficient for your needs. Battery life and charging. Battery life is not something I've had to think about with the M4 iPad Pro, and if I don't have to think about it, that means battery life is great. I use my iPad every single day, and throughout the working week, I'd say I charge it or top up the charge every 2 to 4 days, depending on my workload. For those of you not doing video editing on your iPad, you'd probably be able to push to 5 to 7 days of use without needing to charge, which is incredible for a device that is this thin. And anyone who's using more intense applications, video, audio, image work, I'd expect you'd be charging every couple of days unless you have a super heavy workflow to deal with. But then you'd surely use it plugged in those situations. Because of not having to charge it so much, after 6 months, I'm pleased to say that I've had 0 battery degradation. It's still holding at 100%, which is brilliant. Considering I've spent over $2.5 grand on this setup, I'd be pretty irritated if the battery had started to degrade already. USB-C continues to be a fantastic thing to have on the iPad. I like being able to use the pass-through charging on the Magic Keyboard, which frees up the port for my USB-C thumb drive, making transferring video and image files from my various iPhones and Mac to the iPad a breeze. Do you need accessories with the M4 iPad Pro? I feel like not having the Magic Keyboard and Pencil Pro defeat the purpose of buying a Pro iPad. If you're someone who doesn't see themselves either drawing or doing intense typing sessions on the iPad, then don't buy a Pro model. The Mini or the Air will be amazing devices for you for content consumption and light work without having to splash out on any extra accessories. But if you consider yourself a Pro user, then you probably already have factored in the accessories tax of around £470 for the Magic Keyboard and the Pencil Pro. That's a crazy amount of money for a keyboard case and a pencil, but Apple have made these things so well that stepping down to a third-party alternative cannot be an option if you have the money. And as for how the iPad fits into the rest of the ecosystem, of course, as you'd expect with an Apple device, it works seamlessly with the rest of the family, largely down to iOS, iPadOS, and macOS integration being so brilliant. Universal control, sidecar, AirDrop, multi-device messaging, AirPod switching, all these features work brilliantly across the board, guaranteeing you the seamless experience that as an Apple user, you've come to expect and appreciate. So, have I had any issues? The short answer is no. I'm pretty careful and respectful of my iPad Pro. After all, I spent a lot of hard-earned money on it. But compared to previous iPads, it seems to have held up much better so far than any before it. It's been resilient to scratches from daily use. The Magic Keyboard is hands down the best they've ever made it. Still looks pretty much like new after 6 months of daily use. I haven't really had any issues with software bugs or overheating, and touch wood, it hasn't ever crashed on me. I really have to struggle to think of problems, and that's a really good sign. iPadOS, though, in my opinion, is still holding back the hardware. The OS just isn't pushing the hardware at all. It's the classic problem of what is essentially mobile software being driven by world-class desktop hardware. The benefit, of course, is that that makes the iPad Pro a 5-year plus purchase for most people, because you really do have so much headroom. You don't need to upgrade the device so frequently, and that makes the additional investment a bit easier to cope with. I have zero regrets over my choice, and personally, given the choice today, I would still choose this over an iPad Air. However, I still do have my MacBook Pro, and that's the biggest problem with the iPad. I feel like I always need to have both because each device does certain things better than the other. And that's where Apple has you if you use your tech for a wide range and variety of tasks, as I do, between my business and my personal life, between the podcast and the YouTube channel. Having both the tablet and notebook is an absolute necessity. I guess given the choice, if I could only have one, then I would choose the MacBook Pro over the iPad every single time. But thankfully, and with lots of gratitude, I don't have to make that choice, but you might. And so then you need to carefully consider what you do and where you do it. How portable a device do you need? What type of creation or consumption do you need to do? Which device ticks the most boxes for you? Because when push comes to shove, they'll both do everything, at least to an acceptable standard. But what separates a device from being okay to being great is how well that device works for you as the individual user with your own specific use case. So my final verdict, after 6 months, is the iPad Pro M4 with Nano Texture Display still worth it? For me, absolutely. The combination of a stunning, ultra lightweight design, the powerful M4 chip, and the glare-reducing Nano Texture Display has made this the best iPad experience I've ever had. The screen in particular has been a game changer for my work. Whether it's sketching, presenting to clients, or working on the go, I no longer have to deal with distracting reflections. And in the incredible battery life and seamless Apple ecosystem, it's been a fantastic investment. That said, this iPad is not for everyone. If you're primarily consuming content or doing light productivity, the iPad Air is a much better value. Even if you want a Pro model, the standard display is already phenomenal unless you specifically need the nano texture for your workflow. And of course, iPad OS is still holding back the true potential of this hardware. Until we see a more desktop-like experience, the MacBook Pro remains a necessity for many professionals. If you can justify the price and you know you'll take full advantage of the display and the performance, I say go for it. For me, the M4 iPad Pro with Nano Texture has proven its worth and I wouldn't go back. But if you're on the fence, think carefully about your needs, because at this price, you want to make sure this is the right tool for you. Let me know in the comments, do you think the Nano Texture Display is worth it? Would you go for the M4 iPad Pro or stick with the Air? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you found this review helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tech content. See you next time.